You know, the embargo has had exactly the opposite effect from what was intended. It's destroyed young people's hope for a better future. Now they just want to leave the country. Rather than punishing the leaders, the embargo has hurt the civilians. My name is Mahmoud, and I am 22. I'm reading French at the Baghdad University Language Faculty. I'm also the head of a big family, as I have 3 brothers and 4 sisters. Both my parents are dead. My father died 13 years ago, and my mother more recently, just 3 or 4 months ago. My life is very difficult. To feed everyone, I have to work in the afternoon, every day, for many years already. I've worked in this shop for the last 2 years out of a total of 8 or 9, since the sanctions started 8 or 9 years ago. I don't really remember. And all the time, every day, I can be sure someone will try to negotiate a price or get something for free, because they just cannot afford to buy what I sell. Even my family, my friends and my neighbors, it's so tough to refuse. It's poverty, need, famine, hunger. There are things on sale, but you cannot buy them. And the problem is climbing up through the social classes, day by day, month by month. After wasting his country in an 8-year-long war on Iran in the 1980s, which killed over 1 million people, Western leaders rejected Saddam Hussein as a tyrant of the modern world. The same Western leaders who had sold him every kind of weapon and production plant, from biological to thermal power, in exchange for his precious oil. At that time, the West considered Iraq as a human shield between them and the Islamic Republic of Iran and the rise of Muslim fundamentalism. But Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in August 1990 was a direct attack on Western oil interests. In January 1991, a multinational coalition, including Arab nations, led by the United States, beat the Iraqi army, which surrendered after 2 months of intensive bombardments that took out the country's infrastructure. The United Nations condemned Iraq to disarm, to pay war reparations, and to be punished by one of the toughest embargoes in history. Despite the delaying tactics of Saddam Hussein's regime, most of the military weapons, chemicals and bacteriological production facilities have been destroyed. In 1998, after many diplomatic trials of strength, Iraq accused the UN experts responsible for overseeing the disarmament program of spying for the United States and expelled them. Since then, American and British air forces frequently bomb targets in the north and south of the country, and the embargo continues. In the 1970s, due to its oil revenues, secular Iraq was the most developed Arab nation in the Middle East. Today, the country is drip-fed by the oil for food agreement signed with the UN. The UN Security Council strictly controls Iraqi oil sales and dispenses food, medication and equipment on a one-for-one basis. By keeping 22 million people under the poverty level, the UN hopes to persuade Saddam Hussein to obey its resolutions. More than 1/3 of Iraqi children no longer go to school. The locals tried to keep Habibaya, the poorest area of Baghdad, clean with doubtful results. Others clubbed together to pay someone to remove the refuse once a week. Leishmaniasis, black leprosy, was eradicated in the 60s but made a comeback. Due to the breakdown of the sewerage system in the poor districts and bad conditions of hygiene, many Iraqi children had gastroenteritis. The rate of infant mortality has risen 6-fold during the 10 years of sanctions. According to UNICEF, 90,000 children die each year in Iraq because of the embargo. Hospitals that are not helped by Western humanitarian organizations have become places where children are taken to die, to the despair of Iraqi families and doctors.
My baby here. I came here yesterday, and I even take my friend's body, his baby, child, his age for about month ago. I have taken milk, I have taken food. So what? Is dead. All what I say is what? Is Allah is generous, God is generous. This is the Iraqi fate. Is the fate we are acceptable? The tears of me, tears of all Iraqi women.
Till now we are really suffering because of the situation after the sanction. Till now there is no improvement. We didn't feel any change about the drugs, about the equipment, the materials. Well, till now we haven't enough drugs for our patient. Let us say the most important drug in order to save the patient life of the patient. Well, always we are choosing the alternative. Sometimes we cannot do anything for our patient because we have in the facilities. About the diagnosis also, most of the times we are depending on our clinical judgment on the diagnosing of our patients. So because of everything of this, till now we are suffering, and till now the death rate is very high. Well, the last statistic done in this hospital shows that the death rate in this hospital is more than 5 patients per 24 hours.
We are lacking everything. Please do something to stop the embargo. There is no medication here. We cannot get drugs. My daughter is ill every day. She's not fed enough. She suffers from rickets. Look, she's 20 months old and she weighs just 7.5 kilos. I can only leave it up to the mercy of God.
As doctors, I can say the death rate, it will not stop. It will increase day by day if our situation it not improve. Well, I can give you an examples about our suffering. Let us say simply, when you want to treat your patient after you diagnose them and the diagnosis was settled, you want to give him the drugs. For example, let us say when you have an infection, you have to give the antibiotic. Well, till now we are using the second line and the third line. Till now we cannot use the drug of choice for most of infections. Why? Because the first drug of choice is not available in our country, and even the second line and third line, most of the times we are forced to change the same antibiotic for the same patients for the same illness many times. That is to say, when we are starting with one antibiotic, then after a few days this antibiotic will finish from our hospital, so we will change to other antibiotic. This is not accepted scientifically. Also, I can give you a special problem that in leukemia and other blood disease, let us say the cancer, of course, for the last few years we have increased incidence of leukemia, other cancers, and also the congenital anomalies. Many studies have been done in this hospital especially. Now we are thinking, or we are believing really, that the environmental factors after the war, and most probably the pollution of the atmosphere and the well, that happened after the war, because we believe that the American uses the depleted uranium against our people. This make everything polluted. This increase the incidence of leukemia and other cancers also, and other congenital anomalies.
For 10 years, the key words in Baghdad have been fatalism and survival. You can get everything you need in the markets if you can pay for it, but most people cannot. Shopkeepers complain because they sell nothing for days on end. Strollers often find good bargains, which often conceal family catastrophes. An Iraqi sells his fridge to buy food, another the doors of his house.
And this time the life is very expensive because the commodity is, the price of commodity is very high. Because one commodity of any commodity economic is very expensive, and the wage is very low. We get the wage in the day is very low, not because the resources of money is very little. So everybody want to get a busy, but we not get that because this condition, the cost is this condition. We live it. We struggle this day by business, and from the morning to the night.
تأثير الحصار على الشعب العراقي أولاً حصار ظالم.
This embargo is unfair.
يطلبون
It's simply linked to oil interests.
يعني ما خلونا أي مبادئ للإنسانية.
They've stripped us of our human dignity. We cannot even buy acceptable clothes. I cannot clothe my own family properly. Our situation is very difficult. For instance, a customer comes in to buy food or something else, but he just doesn't earn enough to buy anything but the basic essentials for his children, like eggs, tomatoes, or potatoes. I'm an engineer. I qualified in 1986 in Baghdad. I worked in a company, but every company, including mine, has gone bankrupt. The government pays us unemployment pay of 8,000 dinars a month, about $10 US. To give you an idea of what that can buy, my cigarettes cost 5,000 dinar. I have 3 children and spend my day trying to find ways of keeping them alive. My wife is a teacher on a tiny salary. And apart from food, there's the problem of finding a flat to rent. Some Iraqi families have moved out to the countryside where they can feed their children more easily. But as the sanctions prevent the import of spare parts for farm equipment, crop yields have fallen drastically. According to the FAO, up to 1/3 of fruit and vegetable production cannot get to the markets due to the lack of suitable means of transport. Over half the farmland cultivated before 1990 has been left fallow because there are no fertilizers. The previous UN coordinator, Hans von Sponeck, resigned from his job to protest against the continuation of the embargo adopted by the UN Security Council.
After 2 wars, there are plenty of problems. Warehouses are in bad shape, the transport fleet is in poor shape. The people who manage on the Iraqi side the humanitarian programs. How much motivation, how much interest can one expect when a civil servant earns $2, $3, maybe $4 a month?
Do the top levels, the Iraqi elite, have some alternative, and the high-ranking soldiers in Saddam Hussein's court?
One often hears and reads this, that there's a certain amount of food and a certain amount of medicine that finds its way where it shouldn't. I think one can confirm that. But these are quantités négligeables, small amounts of such items are found in the markets. Some items are found even in neighboring countries.
Exported for sale?
Yes. Sometimes by people, civilians who needed money. When you have no income, when you have an unemployment rate of between 60 and 75%, people need some resources beyond the food basket that they're getting once a month.
It has been imposed on Iraq supposedly to have or to guarantee Iraqi compliance with the UN or the relevant UN resolutions concerning the elimination of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. But now the story and the purpose of the United States is shifting from this issue to a political one. Now the sanctions are kept in place for political end. They are trying to prepare or trying to encourage political change in Iraq with the aim of imposing their hegemony.
Saddam Hussein wants to be seen as the heir to the Mesopotamian kings and the great Arab caliphs who beat the Persians in battle. To exalt patriotism and loyalty to the regime, the only political party, the Baas Party, which tightly controls all group demonstrations, sometimes organizes reconstructions of the epic battles in which great war chiefs like Saddam Hussein beat the enemies of Iraq and the Arabic world. Joy and enthusiasm are not the emotions most noticeable on the faces of the youngsters obliged to take part. Any criticism is perceived as betrayal and punished by death. This festival, which commemorates the founding of Baghdad by Abu Ja'far el-Mansur, has been converted to bring Saddam Hussein into the mythology. For security reasons, though, he does not attend.
The aims of the Allied forces against Iraq was the restoration of Kuwaiti independence. And this was done. Al-Sabah family re-established its sovereignty in Kuwait. So the Iraqis would ask themselves a question: why the sanctions continue to be imposed on them? And for what purpose do the Iraqi civilians have to endure all this suffering?
Does the UN control the exports of oil from Iraq?
No. Not all oil is legally sold across Iraq's borders.
What percentage?
Nobody. You can ask 10 people, you will get 10 different answers, but you can get a sort of a median amount that you can hear. We used to say maybe up to 8 to 10%, or maybe $50 million a month will be the amount that is coming out of illegally acquired revenue from the sale of oil.
All the countries bordering on Iraq profit from the UN's tacit approval of the way Iraq gets around the embargo. These countries buy Iraqi oil at a discount and sell it goods that are not controlled by the sanction authorities. The main oil smuggler is Turkey. To obtain this official invisibility, Turkey probably blackmailed the UN and the Americans for permission to use Turkish air bases.
The Turkish authorities were very clear. They insisted that some traffic carrying extra oil that is outside the legal framework into Turkey, they would insist on. I guess at the time the British and Americans said, I'm sorry, but we don't accept this. And then the Turks reacted by saying, well, if you don't accept this, then we don't accept that your airplanes fly out of Incirlik Air Base in southeastern Turkey into northern Iraq. So like a horse trading, like a barter. Suddenly it became possible, and one heard nothing about no protests. I have seen not a single American or British protest about illegal export of oil into Turkey.
Do you think Saddam Hussein's regime buys arms with this income?
I cannot give you a good answer. I would only like to argue that the control of arms needs to be, of course, on the Iraqi government, but it also needs to go on those who sell the arms and who sells the arms. One could control, just as one could control the illegal export of oil into Turkey, one can control the illegal import of items into Iraq through Jordan, through Syria, from the sea into Qasr, and from Turkey into Iraq. It's not done. It makes me, every time I cross the border from Jordan into Iraq, I'm appalled by the fact that you have two lanes. One lane with trucks that are verified, are controlled by United Nations inspection agents, a Swiss firm, Cotecna, that has been given that responsibility, and another lane where trucks freely go into Iraq uncontrolled. You can buy in Baghdad anything your heart desires, from CD discs to computers to good luxury food. And then you go into a store, as I did when I was in Baghdad, and I say, how is it possible that you have all these electronic goods? And the person in the store said to me, it's easy. All you have to do is in Amman, you take a container, you fill it with items that you like, you pay somebody $100 or $200, and the consignment goes. The impression that I and many others have now is this is purposely done. These porous borders, keeping the borders fairly uncontrolled, allows internationally the statement, we don't know what this Saddam Hussein is doing and what he's trying to manufacture. Well, if you really want to know, you can do something about it, but it's not being done. In addition, what is happening with this preventable export of illegal oil, you are creating income. Income that is shared, like the sale of a carpet. The person who gives you the wool from the sheep gets some money. The person who makes the thread for the carpet gets some money. The person who ultimately makes the carpet gets some money. It's the same with the oil into Turkey. The Kurdish administration in northern Iraq gets some money. The Turkish Kurdish administration on the other side gets some money. The Turkish government has recently imposed a tax on the import of illegal oil into Turkey. They want their share out of this illegal transaction also. And naturally, the Baghdad government gets their share also. And if the Americans and the British accuse Baghdad for buying luxury goods, whiskey, and buying other items that are not necessary, the money for that comes out of this kind of income.
"90% of the population lives below the poverty level, but a tiny minority thrives in Western luxury. Saddam Hussein and his family clan, the Takriti, all enjoy the high life and dictate who is permitted to make money out of smuggled oil, as he controls every link in the chain. His security services immediately cancel all privileges enjoyed by official smugglers and physically interrogate anyone who has their hands in the embargo cash pile, and their families if their loyalty is denounced. All the embargo has done is to divide the population into haves and have-nots. Some have all that they need, good health and no worries. The others live in miserable poverty. The economic embargo imposed by the United States targets the Iraqi poor. That's not fair. The poor are not to blame. I hope the American people understand this. I would like them to join the Iraqi people and explain to the American president the harm being done to the poor. I would like to be told why the main targets are children. Children who are dying day after day. And so are our wives and our grandparents. Why do they have to suffer? Why? France is not doing anything for us at all. All France does is talk. Empty words from President Jacques Chirac, French ministers, French institutions, all the French people who visit Iraq. All the time there are official delegations visiting our hospitals, seeming to gloat on our misfortune. But they never do anything. They may write articles in newspapers, and that is all. Nothing useful. We know that people are looking like peeping Toms, but they never do anything for us. Iraq is completely alone. This is not a military war, but a cultural one. It is a war against children. They die, and we are helpless.
Les enfants meurent, mais on n'y fait rien.
The 5 members of the UN Security Council cannot reach agreement on the conditional suspension of the embargo which aims to force Iraq to accept the presence of disarmament inspection teams. France, Russia and China want the suspension. Great Britain and the United States refuse, and George Walker Bush believes it is essential to take an even stronger stand against Iraq.
The Iraq sanctions have failed for many reasons. One cannot compare Iraq with Yugoslavia, where you at least had a beginning of a multi-party system that doesn't exist in Iraq. So sanctions in those circumstances as they exist today in Iraq only increase the political capital of the president and his government and weaken the people, as we have seen during the last many years.
نجمع إشارات إذا اختلفت نطرح وننزل الإشارة المتشابهة. مثلا طريقة التوزيع هاي هنا نفس الشيء، شلون وزعنا. أكثر جانب يمسنا.
Now, cooperation with other countries is very limited.
الجانب العلمي، الحصار اللي انفرض على.
We are cut off from the outside world.
البعثات تحددت، الدراسة خارج العراق.
The embargo harms knowledge, education, and prevents our access to other cultures.
فرصة من الثقافة اللي موجودة خارج القطر.
We have no future, no hope. We do not think about the future. We just try to survive. We live from day to day because we cannot think about what will happen tomorrow or the next day or next month. We have to be very motivated to find the courage to study and work because we cannot make projects or have ambitions for the future.
Vraiment, vous savez, on a l'impression que notre démarche
We try to teach French, but have little or no books or resources.
est vivement bloquée par ce manque.
How can you expect students to do degree courses and write theses without access to documents and books?
Des études supérieures, préparer un mémoire sans avoir assez de documents et de livres. Donc, il y a aussi le fait que
There is another problem too.
Ces dernières années, un jour,
Students drop out completely for a year or so because earning money to eat simply takes all their time.
Il est obligé de quitter les études pour travailler ailleurs et gagner sa vie.
Studies are secondary to finding work. And this is the same problem for teachers.
Largement et énormément, et ce qui fait qu'il y a beaucoup de professeurs qui quittent donc l'Irak, et ça fait
We are paid very little, almost too little to live, and many teachers are leaving Iraq and are difficult to replace.
Nos cadres d'enseignement.
The Iraqi government cannot pay sufficient salaries to its members in the universities, in the civil administration, in the armed forces. So this whole oil for food agreement is not sufficient at all, and it forms an intrusion into Iraqi political and humanitarian affairs.
The Iraqi government now only spends 10% of the pre-1970 budget for education. Today, the buildings are dilapidated and the teachers, demoralized by starvation wages, often become drivers or housekeepers. Don't you think Saddam Hussein is using this misery for his own ends?
Wouldn't you? I would say, obviously, a government that is in the corner, a government that has been attacked so much, is looking for everything, every opportunity. And when one so easily today can show that sanctions have become the main reason for the suffering, that one uses this for propaganda purposes is quite clear. Everyone in this camp of fighters is using whatever means they have to make their case. And they do in Iraq, just as the State Department does in trying to argue that the entire reason for the suffering lies with Saddam Hussein and his government.
All day long, the only Iraqi television channel broadcasts propaganda programs extolling the victories of the Iraqi army over Iran and Kuwait and criticizing American and Zionist imperialism. Saddam Hussein is presented as the savior of his people. O people, heirs to Arab civilization and the immortal message, our enemies continue to plot against us and our dear president, the light of Iraq. Misery has made Islam even more radical, and unemployment has sent women to their homes. The power of the imams, controlled by the government, grows daily. Over half the Iraqi population is Shiite, although the wealthy ruling class is Sunnite. Karbala is a holy place mostly venerated by the Shiites. In the spring of 1991, at the end of the Gulf War, the Shiites in the south rebelled. The Iraqi army crushed the revolution in a bloodbath. Since that time, Saddam Hussein nominates the imams, including the Imam of Karbala.
كذلك العراق في الوقت الحاضر
Today, Iraq is a victim of injustice. It has been attacked by 33 countries, all 33 acting unjustly. Our dear president, may God protect him, refuses this injustice. America unjustly deprives Iraq and its people of medication and food.
At what price should the desired aim of the West of changing the political regime in Iraq be met? Does the killing of Iraqi civilians, innocent, does the deprivation of Iraqis from medicine and food justify the political aim of the Western politicians? And if this purpose was achieved, Iraq would have paid a tremendous sacrifices and suffering, which I think the Iraqi people will never forget, and they would continue to be very much bitter about the way they were handled by the West, and perhaps a more radical and anti-Western regime will prevail in Iraq.
The government of France, my own government, other European governments have signed important international treaties. The Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Geneva Convention, the Hague Convention, the United Nations Charter. All of these were created to protect individuals, to protect countries and circumstances from what is happening right now in Iraq. One should never a moment forget that the human rights coin has two sides. Yes, there is of course the issue of violations of human rights within Iraq. But increasingly over the last 10 years, we see a violation of international law and human rights as an external contribution to the suffering of the Iraqi people. How much longer must people die as a result of sanctions?